Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're having a great weekend. I've been wanting to do this set of videos for a while, but the logistics are kind of tough to work out. We're going to see how this goes. Hopefully it will be the first of many shelfie safaris. We're going to start off with our Penguin Classics Deluxe editions. We have two shelves of those. I'm going to use the one that's right over here, just off camera. We also have another one out in our main room. There's about 30 books, so we'll see how this goes. In addition to Penguin Classics Deluxe editions, we have some of the oversized trade paperbacks, a little bit larger than these ones that are here right behind me. And then it's like the supersized ones. I'll get to those at the end. But these are roughly in chronological order for the deluxe edition. So starting off, we've got the Greek Myths by Robert Graves. This is a reference work. It happens to be a reference work with like the coolest cover ever on a reference work, with the sort of comic book style cover, and it's even on the flaps as well. And this book is not meant to be read cover to cover. It is really a work to dive into, to kind of cross-reference myths, allusions, ideas like that. And within each section, Graves gives his references where it can be found in various classical sources. But then he also gives his interpretations, very specific interpretations, always filtered through his mindset, his idea that sort of in the early Bronze Age or pre-age, there were matriarchal societies focused on a concept of three rather than on like the four seasons and patriarchal societies that we have later on in classical times. And so that permeates this text, but it's an absolutely fascinating read. It's a great reference. I always use it when I'm reading anything like Homer, Ovid, any of the Greek tragedians, Shakespeare, just so many different writers. Up next, we have the Histories from Herodotus. This is the Tom Holland translation. I, of course, did that like massive Here Lies Herodotus read along with the Salencourt translation here. But this is, I've read sections from this. It's very readable. It has a nice conversational tone. If you enjoy Tom Holland's other nonfiction books, his translation of Herodotus is probably right up your alley. Of course, we've got a great Persian fighting a Greek here on the cover. Okay, up next, we have the Quran. An underread work, I think. This is the Tarif Khalidi translation. I finished reading it last December, and I'll link that video in the description box. But this is a great translation. And this is a book that, just on its own, with the number of references and allusions that exist in literature, it should be read. But the fact that it's, of course, a sacred text to so many, millions, billions of people, should be read. And it's worth the time. And this is, I think, it's my favorite translation of it. We have the Sagas of the Icelanders. This is just a massive tome. Many, many, many sagas in here. And of course, there's also some tales at the end, which are a little bit different than the sagas. They have a different feel to them. These are Icelandic sagas, so you don't see the Orkney sagas in here. You don't see necessarily the Norwegian like king sagas in here, or Danish kings. It's really focused on Iceland. Eagle Saga is in here, the Laxardala, Gunnlaug's Serpent Tongue, which might be my favorite outside of Njal's Saga, which is not in here. And then a couple of the Vinland sagas as well. So this is a great, great book. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The revised text, not the original 1818 text, but the revised text. Again, the fun sort of cartoony style in here. And the monster. I love this book. I love sort of the high romantics, and so this book just fits right in. It's great. The idea that it's not just science fiction, but there's so much more going on to it, is just delightful, and it's a book I love. Read a number of times. Fairy Tales from the Brothers Grimm. These are translated by Philip Pullman, who periodically makes editorial decisions to make slight changes, or which version of the Grimm's tale to use. Their later revisions became a little bit more moralizing, and so he often is using earlier versions of the tales that they accounted for. And then he provides sort of an translator's note at the end of each tale, and then a reference to other tales from other cultures or other writers who would give a similar story, which is quite nice. These are magnificent. The Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales, and we can see all sorts of exciting things happening on here. One of the of these. Yeah, one of these has the Little Mermaid. A truly sad story, personally. This, again, is an absolutely fantastic translation. And the other bonus in this is that each of the stories has... Let me find one real quick. Each of the stories has a photo of an old paper cut. That would have been corresponded to the story. Some of them are super elaborate, and those are fun, not just to like read through the tales, but to then try and like recreate some of those. That's a really fun craft I do with my daughters. A book I do up next, 2 deluxe classics I found used for very cheap. Not a huge fan of either. One would be Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert, who I don't like as an author. I think he takes characters and puts them in a little aquarium or terrarium, and then wants to just move little pieces around in there. It doesn't feel lifelike. I find the realism seems to just be so much air. All the details are so much air. And that's despite the fact that I love Lydia Davis, both as a translator and as a very interesting story writer in her own right. But as a translator, I loved her version of Swann's Way. This is tough. It's a tough book to get through. And then Storm of Steel by Ernst Jünger. This is it's a slight revision memoir that is based, though, on the diaries he was writing as a 19-year-old up into his very early 20s during World War I. He was German, and it has a very strange tone. It can be very hard to read because it has a strange tone. He seems to be he's not glorying in the war. He feels so much more detached with what's happening, while being convinced that he's absolutely correct in fighting in this war. It has an outstanding cover, but the text and subject matter, is something I would cautiously recommend. Another one, rather cautious recommendation, H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu. There is a black spine trade paperback version of this text. Is the exact same text. It has the exact same notes from S.T. Joshi, the exact same introduction, same tales are in here. This just has the ridiculous Cthulhu characters on them, different versions. Dagon. And Lovecraft, of course, he's somebody I take in doses. I have to be very careful about reading too much Lovecraft because his refracted worldview is quite despicable. But the horror and the fascination of horror there is quite astonishing. Rashōmon and other stories by Ryūnosuke Akutagawa, a Japanese short story writer, and one. I find many of these stories that are very haunting. In a Bamboo Grove was famously filmed as Rashōmon by Akira Kurosawa, but the later stories, as his mental health is sort of he's losing control on his mental health, and he's really entering some deep depressions. Stories like Spinning Gears or I believe Hellscreen, those are really quite harrowing stories, but this is an excellent edition. This is one of my wife's books, Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I think she's a slightly stronger Steinbeck fan than I am. I'm more of like an East of Eden guy, but Grapes of Wrath, this is solid. The way that, especially early on in the book, the way Steinbeck alternates the chapters is quite interesting. The way that they sort of have these shorter alternating, more like natural, like what's the lesson from nature we can draw chapters. Those are curiosities. Graham Greene, The End of the Affair. My wife and I have both read this. I think she prefers this one. I think this is her favorite from Graham. Well, I shouldn't say that. Our Man in Havana is both of ours favorite, but this would be her second favorite. And this, of course, is just about an affair. And it reflects, I think, some of Greene's own, not just his own personal life, which is very much there, but his own spiritual life and how that was shifting as well as this was going on. The Quiet American, which would be my second favorite of Graham Greene's books. This is set in Vietnam, and it does act as sort of an indictment. It interrogates the U.S. involvement in Vietnam as the Vietnam War is growing as a conflict. But it does it in a very strange, oblique way. It's a spy novel that's not quite a spy novel. It's certainly not a war novel. It's not a romance, and yet it pulls elements from each of those to create this strange, alchemic brew. But I think it's a very good book. This will be on my reading list next month. The Master and Margarita from Bulgakov, and while written during the roughly 1930s, and sort of Bulgakov was finishing it up in the aftermath of the massive purges in 36 and 37. It was written for the drawer. It wasn't meant to be published during his lifetime, and he knew that. And so the sense of satire, the sense of humor can feel like it's balanced on a nice edge, because in real life that's how it felt. And this, of course, is just an absolutely astonishing book itself. Cover's superb, all-timer. And then Gravity's Rainbow, the book that everybody's read the first sentence from, and so few have read the last sentence from. This is not a book I would recommend anybody start Pynchon with. His short story collection, Slow Learner, I wouldn't recommend that either. But it's worth the attention. An attentive read to this book, I think, does reap rewards for a reader and for our understanding of consciousness and humor and all sorts of things. It's worth paying attention to and giving an attentive read to. But it is a very dense book, and it's a complex book. But I will say the first 100 pages, 120 pages, I think, do read quite smoothly. I don't think that they're particularly baffling. It's as the book goes on that it feels more and more dense. Now these next two, these are publications from 1993. These are printings, I should say, from 1993. So this is the Recognitions from William Gaddis. This is not a Hubert van Eyck, nor is it a Jan van Eyck. It is from Hugo van der Goes, but it is a detail from an altarpiece, which is significant for Hubert van Eyck and for this book. This is brilliant. I'm so happy that NYRB Classics reprinted both Recognitions and JR, which will be up next, this past year, roughly, right? Last fall, I want to say. Because these are books that I 3 years ago, I don't know if I had found anybody who had read either of these beyond my wife. And yet, now so many people have, and they understand what an absolute joy, but a dark joy Gaddis can be. His mind is, amazing. And this is probably my favorite. But JR is astonishing. The way that JR is told exclusively through dialogue, really, is almost, it's a swirling chaos of language that really does mimic real life. And the satire in here is crackling. I mean, it's up there with Jonathan Swift and Aristophanes in terms of satire. So the cover, of course, is just perfect for JR. Love both of these. I read this while traveling to distant track meets as a coach when I was in my early 20s. It was great. Another book, one that I bought so that I found it used, and I've tried it, and my thoughts on this book are clear. Finnegan's Wake. It doesn't keep me awake. Let me put it that way. Against the Day from Thomas Pynchon. These are, of course, the oversized ones. Great, strange book. I do think it could have been trimmed a little bit. I love the Chums of Chance. I love steampunk, so I love the Chums of Chance. I love the Western, and I find the sort of the science fiction elements with Tesla and Kit to be really quite interesting. I think the book sort of runs a little too long, but it's a great book. I would certainly recommend reading this before trying Gravity's Rainbow. I think this hooks readers in a little bit better. Argall from William T. Vollmann. This is part of his Seven Dreams, and this is the one that is set in the 17th century and is a retelling of Jamestown. So Captain John Smith, Pocahontas, numerous other personages from history are represented in this. It is written in an obsolete vernacular, like Wildcat from Eli Cash. I mean that. It is very much written in an obsolete vernacular. It is Vollmann is trying to mimic the language of the 17th century, what Captain Smith's diary entries would have sounded like, the way that people would have spoken to each other. That's what he wants his characters to sound like. If you're in for that, I think it'll be a really rewarding read. If you're not, it will be maddening. So, just fair warning. And last but not least from these ones is probably my favorite book of the 21st century. And it would be up there for my wife. I think it's the book like on our list would be the highest, like across both. And that's The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I love this book. I've read it a couple of times. I first read it when I was 22, 23, and I've reread it I think at least twice since then. So my wife and I each have a copy so that we can read it together, or if necessary, I keep one at school to try and like push on students. I've introduced this book to a number of students who have absolutely loved it. Some of them have read it in the original Spanish, and so this is a book I love. Now we have some poetry. So we have the Shahnameh, the Persian Book of Kings from Abulkasim Ferdowsi. It's translated by Dick Davis. This book is amazing. Anybody who is a fan of Homer, Virgil, any of those type sagas of the Icelanders, please look around for a copy or check your library. This is a very, very, very rewarding read, and it's translated so fluidly. Davis just an amazing job of translating this work. I've been reading it this year. I've absolutely loved it. Up next, I have French poetry, 1820 to 1950. One thing that's nice about this book is it roughly groups the poets into schools and then has a short 2 to 5 page introduction on each of those sort of schools of poetry. So there's the Romantics, there is, let's see, Parnassians, right? Let's see. Yeah, Romanticism in France, the Parnassian movement, the Symbolist movement, Cubism. So those are represented, and then the original French is given along with a prose translation to explain like what the text is saying, but you can read it in the original French to get a sense of how the language might have been poetic. And I think that's useful. I think that's really useful with poetry, and it's something I appreciate about this volume. I certainly don't read it cover to cover, but it's something I dip in and out of. It's a good volume. Similarly, the Penguin Book of Spanish Verse is the same way, where there are, on this one I believe it's facing pages where it's Spanish on the left page and English on the right page. This, of course, has this sort of golden age of Spanish poetry centuries ago, and then there's a roughly 200-year gap, and then it picks back up again, roughly 150 years ago, up into this is the 3rd edition, so it's up into the 20th century. So more recent Spanish poets, Luis Cernuda, Federico Garcia Lorca, and then even poets after the Spanish Civil War are represented in here. And again, it's very useful to have the facing language. I can roughly read Spanish. My vocabulary is not large enough to be able to read it fluently, and my mind doesn't work quickly enough for me to understand when people are speaking to me for the most part, but it's nice to be able to see that, and I can read it and then look at the translation and look back, and it works pretty well. And this is a good volume, much as the French volume is. The Penguin Book of Scottish Verse. The New Penguin Book of Scottish Verse. This is dynamite. I absolutely love it. I acquired it this summer and have been reading passages from it. Much of it is written either in Scots, or with sort of side glosses, or in the local like vernacular. So it's not quite Scots. It's English, but it's kind of a hybrid in between. So it sounds and reads just a little bit different. And this, runs way back, over 1,000 years, and then up through the Middle Ages, up through the Renaissance, the English Renaissance, up through the Enlightenment and Scottish Enlightenment, and even into the 20th century. And this is a fantastic volume. I've really been enjoying reading through it. Another supersized Penguin classic would be Samuel Richardson's Clarissa, which I've not read. But it's ready. It's waiting for 1 month. And The Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki, which I will probably read next March. I decided to run with Parting the Waters this March, but I'll probably read this next March. And this is, gigantic. And then finally, not a Penguin classic, but an equally oversized volume is The Complete Works of Plato, all of the dialogues. This includes all of pseudo-Plato as well. Stuff that was Platonic school, but probably not Plato. And then dialogues and letters, epistles that are clearly not Plato, but are informed by his thought. And this is a great edition. Has everything. So it's one I enjoy going to. It doesn't have necessarily the detail of notes and that you would expect with like some of my Penguin Classics editions here of Plato, but it has an introduction to every single work, dialogues and the epistles, and there are some guidance in terms of what to pay attention to. So great volume. So anyways, that's the first of the shelf tours, the Shelfie Safari. Let me know how this went, and I'll see you. I'll probably be doing one of these roughly every weekend. We'll see. And some of these might be randomly determined shelves. We'll see. But again, I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you.